So let's go way back to middle school. I can't remember exactly, but my best guess would be that I was like 10 to 12 years old. I was getting abused at home by my father, and I was being bullied at school by the other kids. My mom was the only person who understood that, so she let me fake being sick to stay home from school, sometimes just to get a break. Now, I don't necessarily believe in ghosts, but my childhood house was weird and we all think it was haunted. There would be multiple times when we would hear occasional voices that weren't there. We would just get this feeling that we were being watched. We would randomly start feeling just weird and wrong, and I honestly don't have a better way to explain that, but we all felt it. The most common thing though was that we would hear footsteps in the hallway and even see the shadows of feet from the gaps under our doors. Like I said, I don't want to say I believe in ghosts, but something about that house just wasn't right. So back to the story. I was getting abused at home and bullied at school pretty hard lately, so I coordinated with my mom so that we could fake me being sick so I could get the day home alone to recover and rest. After everyone left and I was home alone, I just felt wrong and uneasy the whole time, but I couldn't explain why. Then later in the day, I'd guess early afternoon around 3 p.m. or so, I start occasionally hearing a footstep or two in the hallway. Now, I'm like 10 to 12 and I'm hearing footsteps in my house, so I'm terrified. And I'm not talking faint and quiet footsteps, I'm talking a full grown man wearing steel-toe boots footsteps. So I'm freaking out at this point and trying to reassure myself. My thinking was, okay, this is scary, but all that's ever happened is this thing made noises and made us feel weird, so it can't hurt us, right? Then, out of nowhere, all of the lights in the house cut off, and all of the toilets in the house flush at the same time. I tried to comfort myself by saying that it was just sensory stuff, but then almost like it read my mind and called my bluff, whatever it was manifested into a physical, material action for the first time. So I felt exposed and threatened. So at this point, 10 to 12-year-old me was freaking the hell out. Since the only source of support in my life at the time was my mom, I call her and she's at work, and then I just start crying and yelling about what's happening and how scared I am. Then, inexplicably, after I finish pouring everything out on her and she's finally able to start talking to comfort me, it all stopped. Now I'm 23, so I'm at least twice the age I was when this happened, and I still haven't come up with an explanation for it. The best I can come up with is this. When I was 21, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 2. Bipolar mania can sometimes result in psychosis and hallucinations, but that doesn't happen with type 2, and I've never had any problems with those things before. Additionally, bipolar disorder typically develops in your 20s, so the idea that I could have experienced the worst symptoms of my life and actually start hallucinating an entire decade before I was diagnosed is a serious stretch. Like I said, I don't necessarily want to say I believe in ghosts, but this shit was damn near inexplicable. I was sitting on my bed and I was home alone, of course. There was a dog and a cat with me, and mind you, they always stir when something is around the house. The house has cameras around it, and the thing beeps when motion goes off at any of the cameras. If it's the front camera, it announces it's the front door. My front door is inside a walled-off courtyard with a half-swing gate that I can see from 2 of my windows. If anybody ever walks in that gate, not only do I see them, but I always hear the gate, which sets off the dog. The only other path to the front door is from a larger gate that leads to the backyard. I can't see it, but it's large and noisy. All the walls are covered in thick vine and there's no way to quietly climb these walls or gates. So we have cameras, motion sensor alerts, animals, and myself. I'm sitting in my room and the TV is paused. Now, if you are familiar with doorbells, when you push it in, it makes 1 ding, and when you release the button, it makes your 2nd ding. I'm very familiar with this because I always like to pause for 3 seconds when I ring a friend's doorbell. So I'm sitting there, windows open, and the doorbell rings only once. I immediately freeze and the 2nd ding never happens. The dog doesn't even look up. At this point, I feel like I imagined it, but I know what I heard for sure. I jumped up and went straight to the windows, and within 20 seconds of the bell, I had eyes on the front door. Nothing at all, just 1 ding. Not to sound cool, but I grabbed my bat and head out to the front door. I scope around and see nothing. I walk up to the doorbell and it's been pressed in, and it's stuck. The button itself is also buzzing due to it being smashed in. It's literally wedged into itself. As I'm looking at the bell, it pops out in front of my eyes and the last ding goes off and I jump out of my skin. This happened 6 months ago. I'm 29 years old and a male with adequate physical training of sorts. I ran into my room and called 2 people and made them talk to me on the phone for a while. When the homeowners were able to speak to the next day, I asked to check the cameras and they did. They saw nothing. I kid you not, I'm not making any of this up, but they saw nothing on the camera, not even me walking around and investigating. I showed them my call logs and had them check the minutes leading up to the phone calls, and nothing. It's the only experience I've had in my life where I was truly afraid, and it's the most confused I've been. It's actually the first time I've talked about it since it happened, and I'm getting massive chills. Who pushed the button? It has a spring in it. What pushed the button? Came home from work planning to quickly shower and go out again. I parked across the street in front of my neighbor's house since I was only going to be there for a short while. I started everything up and went to the kitchen for a quick cup of water. The way the house is shaped, I can see from the front window from the kitchen. The hallway and the kitchen lights were the only lights on in the house. I thought I saw someone standing looking through the window while I was at the counter, so I turned off the light to get a better look. The shadow moved and disappeared, so I approached the window to peek through an angle. I saw a man walking up and down our front yard a couple times before turning down the sidewalk. I figured he was looking for a house number since the porch lights were off, and since he was heading down the street, I assumed he had realized he was at the wrong house. I honestly didn't think anything of it and went back to my shower. I thought I heard knocking while I was in the shower, but I just ignored it since it didn't last long. Once I got out of the bathroom, I could see flashing lights down the hallway. I went to go check and the whole front room was flashing in red and blue. I looked out the window again to see cop cars crowding the street directly in front of my house. I quickly put my shoes on and went outside to see what's going on. There were only 4 or 5 cop cars down the street and a man was being arrested on the other side of the sidewalk. I waved a policeman over to ask what was going on, and he just said to keep my distance and not to interfere. I mentioned that my car had been cut off by police vehicles and I was planning on leaving. He responded I would have to wait until everything was cleared out. I waited 15 minutes before calling a friend to pick me up and take me to the studio. While I was there, I got a call from my parents saying I needed to come home because the cops were there. Apparently, our front door neighbor had a son who she hasn't seen in a while. He's schizophrenic and apparently had been living on the streets, but that night he did a bunch of drugs. Somehow in his altered state, he found his way to his mom's house. When she didn't answer the door, he decided to bust through her front window and start chasing her around the house. Somehow, she got out without his knowledge and was knocking on my door to be let in so she could call 911. Thankfully, a neighbor let her in and the cops apprehended her son. I'm not sure what he was doing in our yard or peeking through our windows. I'm just glad I didn't open the door to him and he didn't decide to go through our window. I got in a lot of trouble from my parents for parking on that side of the street because while his mom was at the neighbor's house, he decided to take his frustration out on the side of my car, which was in my dad's name, and left several sizable dents. It almost looked like I had been T-boned, like this guy had been throwing his entire body at the vehicle. I also got in trouble for going to the studio knowing the cops were at our house. I honestly just didn't know how to react and wasn't thinking properly. It was all a very surreal experience for me.